10-10 wins. You give us 22 minutes. We'll give you the world.
Good morning. 64 degrees at 8 o'clock. It's Tuesday, September 11th. I'm Lee Harris. Here's what's happening. It's primary day, and the polls are open in New York City.
I remember September 11, 2001 like it was yesterday. I remember I was in 7th grade, 7th period class, Miss Klein's science class, which is my hardest class of the year. And I walked in and I instantly knew something was wrong.
I remember being terrified. I was in another country, visiting my mother's side of the family in Russia. We had actually flown out of New York airport at 10 p.m. on September 10th. I woke up the next day. I was woken up by my grandfather, and he basically said, "Hey, I think something's going on in America."
I was sitting there in my living room watching TV. I saw the second plane struck the tower number 2.
I saw this massive hole, and I kind of knew it wasn't a small plane.
I could still feel this like instant panic rising in my throat. I had 2 aunts at the time working in the city at NYU. One of them was a student there, the other one was just working there. And I remember thinking, are they safe? Are they okay? You know, I hope they stayed home that day, and just wanting to contact them and make sure that everything was all right.
I had just started high school, and it just so happened that the classroom I was in was my world history class. It was Mr. Broskell's class, I remember that very clearly. And we were in the middle of a lesson, and his wife called him, crying frantically, and you know, he didn't know how to react. He himself was completely confused as to what the situation was. And it turned out that his brother-in-law was supposed to be in one of the buildings, and his wife had no idea if he'd arrived at work or what, because she hadn't heard back from him. Luckily, it turns out that he'd missed his train that day because of Monday Night Football the night before.
I left the house, got on the train, decided to go to the office, and I recall that the trains stopped at 59th Street. They didn't give anyone an explanation, but I already knew what was happening. So I got out on the platform, and I don't know if it was a miracle or if just happened to be I met my wife, who was then my girlfriend at the time. We're not living together, so she was coming in from her apartment in a different address. We happened to meet at 59th Street, which is a pretty lucky coincidence given, you know, New York, and she was taking different trains.
The second plane hit, and that's when I was like, I am not going to work today, that's it. Afterwards, it was just, I was just really glad that at the magazine where I worked, we had just finished shipping the issue, because I don't know what I would have done fact-checking these random details when I knew that like thousands of people had died.
I remember not knowing what was going on. No one knew at the time, until later on when I got home. They said it had been a terrorist attack and how many other places had been hit. It was very scary. My dad at the time was working in the city. My mom was working in Queens, but regardless of how close we were to home, those commutes were crazy.
I kept thinking, this isn't real, it's not happening. You know, it seemed like a movie, and I was so far away that I couldn't imagine. That whole week was really, really hard, because I hadn't seen my grandparents in Russia in a really long time. And it was supposed to be a happy time, and it was just terrifying.
Things started to get really scary because we worked in Rockefeller Center, and since nobody knew exactly what was happening, rumors started coming in that maybe Rockefeller Center was the next target. And that made us really scared. I recall looking outside the window from her office, and there were tons of people already out on the street. It was really surreal. So we got down and decided to just go to my apartment. I was living in Manhattan at the time. And we quickly realized that was going to be harder than we thought, because there were no trains available.
My father had to walk the 59th Street Bridge. He worked right on Fifth Avenue. And he remembers how crazy it was and how people had a carpool days after the attacks. And He works a second job in the evenings. He would cross the 59th Street Bridge every night to go to work, and you could still see for months and months at a time the smoke still billowing from ground zero. It was very awful.
They closed the airports, and I remember exactly that the airports were closed from that Tuesday until Friday. And, you know, I just still can hear my mom talking frantically to my dad, like every hour of every day, trying to figure out what they were going to do.
People were congregating around cars with AM radios, trying to get as much news as possible. A lot of rumors were coming in, you know, there were other targets in New York, so it was really scary. The trek over to my apartment was about 150 blocks. I was living in Inwood, which is close to 200th Street in Manhattan. And I remember we ended up walking about 4 hours that day, but we weren't walking alone. Manhattan was walking with us.
Going to work the next week, because we didn't go to work, I think, that whole week. All the posters of all the missing people were just like heartbreaking. They were all over that Times Square area where my office used to be, and it was so many young people. It was just really, really rough.
It's funny because I actually don't remember flying back at all. You know, I know that we flew back and everything was fine, but I don't remember that experience. It's weird. It's like it's all a blank.
You know, with all the horrible things that happen now, as a New Yorker, you can't help but think, oh, is it a terrorist attack or not? So I'd say it really has changed the way I look at things and the world, and I'm just hoping that things can improve for the better in the future.